Hi, hello. My name is Teresa. You can call me that. You can call me Soft Chaos. Um, I kind of want to preface this with I'm hoping that this can be a bit of a conversation. So if there's something, I get a little heady, I get a little theory heavy here. So if we're in a space where you don't understand something, I fundamentally function better when I'm having a conversation versus like reading with people that are also not reading, you know? So if you have a question, just like you can give a shout, you can put a hand up, whatever, and I'm cool with that. Secondarily, I want you to know that this is coming from a place of like deep passion and commitment to sound. I mean that most literally. This is not what I studied. This is not what I know, academically from an institutional standpoint, but it is definitely something that drives the way that I play music. And so this is where I'm coming from. Also, is it possible to get a little bit of light on people so I can see them? Period. You all look so beautiful. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean that. If you guys have a question, you got to let me know. And are we good? Everybody good? Period. Okay, the queer people in the house. Yeah. Okay. So this is called Freaky Belladonnas. The way that I came about getting to this place and thinking about experimental music and who gets to make it is fundamentally about my experiences as being a DJ. I get asked quite often what genre I play, and then when I respond that I play techno, folks decide that that's not actually what's happening. And there's only so many times you can hear that, right? I think the first time it was a little surprising. The second time it was extremely off-putting. The third time, instead of getting bothered, I decided that I needed to figure out an ontological and epistemological way of answering the question without pissing off the promoter, to be completely honest, right? Like, that's my job, right? So what does that look like? What does that conversation sound like? But also, on a personal level, where do the things that I love come from, right? And why can't they do them more easily? So with that, I'd like to get started. I kind of wanted to show you a little bit about where musically and sonically I come from, right? All of the folks that you see here on the screen are folks I deeply love, but also folks that taught me how to hear sound, how to listen to music, how to understand rhythm, right? So we've got Lil Kim, right? But right? But we also have Jay Dilla, we have Jeff Mills. Jeff Mills teaches you that you can play free jazz while you're playing techno, right? That is what this man is fundamentally doing. We've got Beverly Glenn Copeland, who is maybe one of the most, I think personally, undervalued, not given his flowers enough trans Black person that's been making electronic music. And it hardly ever gets put into the conversation with other trans artists and trans folks that are driving the culture forward. We have Moor Mother, who's brave enough to have conversations about what the world is as it is existing in the world today. We have Julianne Huxtable, who is rave mother, but also an instrumentalist. The turntables are her instruments, right? We've got Bobby Beethoven, who is, I don't know how to explain Ashland besides if you've never heard him play, like, take a picture, write it down, find that it's incredible work, you know what I mean, right? Then you have Tyga Paw, who is a stalwart of the most beautiful, powerful techno you've ever heard, but also, again, there's the things that thread these folks through are their bravery to speak about the conditions in which they live, or make textures that speak to the conditions in which they live, right? You've got DJ Rashad, who literally, before his past, rest in peace, you know what I mean? His best track to me is still I Don't Give a Fuck. Who says that, right, in a track? Who feels that in this room sometimes? All of us. Who says that in a track? Him, right? And if we take a few of these folks, which we'll get to this later, Jeff Mills, Yazis, who is, she lives in Berlin, and also references deeply the Black metropolis in her work, and Slim Soldedad. All three of these artists reference a Black future that implies that Black people will be there in the future despite the conditions in which they live today. They think about space as a frontier. I find that a little bit problematic, but I do love them, right? Because like in the world that we live in today, space is a place that's to be colonized. But we'll get back to that in a little bit of the essay. Okay, so through studying the history of the movement of sound, I find solace in accepting my transness. And because of the stories that I heard surrounding these artists, in essence, their history is my history as well. Something I think about a lot is the ecosystem of experimentation and how it's classed, it's racialized, and it's gendered. So if the interaction of music is interchangeable, it's genre tag sounds rather than people's expression, that is at the heart of how music has been devalued in the streaming era, right? So where does that leave the rest of us? The weirder of us, the browner of us, the blacker of us, the queerer of us, right? It's in the financial interest of streaming services to discourage critical audio culture, right? And in general, to continue eroding connections between artists and listeners. And so I wonder where that leaves us in the margins as a whole, right? Artists formulating questions about modernity because of their particular subjectivity or lack thereof work, like most artists, in precarity. So I truly do believe that to push the needle forward, there needs to be an active understanding of the surrounding edges of need for artists that take risks, whether that's politically or sonically or with regard to making music outside of the position of being othered. So let me put it like this. Dance music needs experimentation to survive the shit show where we are right now. And so at that sonic edge is where people are seen the least. So how do we learn to care beyond sound and engage the politics of care within the ecosystem of music making? Somebody that I think about a lot with regards to this is Lorraine O'Grady. Is anybody familiar with Lorraine O'Grady? No one? Cool, I just wanted to make sure that like I'm not gonna explain something that we know. Basically, Lorraine O'Grady was a bad bitch. She just passed away. She was at the forefront of asking questions about experimentation, and it's part of the reason that I'm bringing her into the fold of this conversation. She taught me how to ask those questions by just examining her work. So as a conceptual artist and a cultural critic, Lorraine O'Grady was committed to demonstrating intention and poetic commitment to process rather than resolution. She was an advocate of hybridity, right? And she presented alternatives to the hierarchical, right? So creating images, ideas, and situations in her work and writing, and teaching that we can allow binaries to be seen as reciprocal. So for both/and. So in 1980, Lorraine O'Grady left her apartment wearing an evening gown, which you can see up here. An evening gown and a cape made out of 100 pairs of white dinner gloves, carrying a white whip studded with white chrysanthemums. She was going to a party at just above Midtown, and so to speak, an avant-garde space in Manhattan, representing work by African American and other artists of color. So O'Grady created the fictional persona, this is hilarious to me, I cannot believe she did this, of a 1950s beauty queen, right? Which is fab, but also maybe not fab, because what is a beauty pageant? You know? Anyways, so her name was Mademoiselle Bourgeois Noire, or Miss Black Middle Class. I shit you not, Miss Black Middle Class. That's fat. I'm sorry if somebody did that today, eating down boots. She explained that Mademoiselle Bourgeois Noire was inspired by the futurist declaration that art has the power to change the world. And the persona was generated out of O'Grady's anger at the racism and sexism prevalent in the art world and her own complex relationship to race. She was the daughter of Jamaican immigrants, and she was raised in a privileged environment that contrasted with what she described as neighboring Black working class culture and the disadvantaged positions of Black people in American society, right? So she says, through Mademoiselle Bourgeois Noir, she expressed the conflicts in her own identity, while also, she stated, invading art openings to give people a piece of her mind. I'd like to take a pause here, because I could keep reading, but I just want to let you know that as a Black artist, hearing that another Black artist has this kind of energy in the world is comforting, to say the least. Making music is this very vulnerable process, right? I'm not telling anybody in this room something new, but to make it and to say something brave, that's an entirely different task in its own. And I love her for this. Anyways, so O'Grady created the fictional persona, right? In response to the exclusion of Black artists from a mainstream art world. She explained that, apologies. This serves as a political character that represents elements of O'Grady's identity at an intersection of poetry and autobiography as a middle-class woman of European and Jamaican descent. At the gallery, O'Grady turned heads. She raised her whip, which she called the whip that made plantations move. Yeah, some of you get it and some of you don't, but that's pretty heavy. A Black woman using a whip on herself in the 1980s in an art space is saying something, right? Referencing the slave drivers on Southern plantations and gave herself 100 lashes. And she shouted poems of protest against the exclusion of Black people, against Black artists who believed that she believed that were compromising their identities to make work that was agreeable to white curators and their audiences. The white gloves covering her body represented the work growing out of the system as art with white gloves on. Material and sartorial interventions of the work, for example, the white gloves she wore, are symbolic of the internalized oppression of Black women to conform to a set of gendered beliefs established by respectability politics. The whip as an additional prop exemplifies the external oppression from art spaces, both in institutions, often singular interpretations of Black artists, and their direct exclusions of this artist's work. The segregation of the art world in the 1980s, let's also take a pause, the 1980s was not that long ago, right? Prevented Black artists from gaining mainstream attention. I would argue that that's the same now for experimental Black artists. O'Grady recalls that select Black artists in the 1980s who were receiving mainstream attention were tentative in voicing any frustrations, and this led them to shy away from explicit displays of resistance. This character that she created was she quotes, an equal opportunity critic or castigator. She had no interest in presenting safe, polished work. Her focus lay perhaps less on how Black artists fit into an already existing avant-garde, but embracing a logic of doubleness to show how Black artists and artists of color shift our understandings of the origin of the total avant-garde. When I think of O'Grady, I'm reminded of Lil' Kim. Whether that's because of a geographical or temporal bias, I'm not really sure. I grew up in Southern California, and everybody loves Lil' Kim there, you know? But I do love the idea of collapsing styles and types of art. So there's this seminal interview that happens between Bell Hooks and Lil' Kim, right? And this is in 1997. This is for Paper Magazine. You've got Bell Hooks interviewing. Bell Hooks at the time is writing about the intersections of love and violence in the world as it relates to race, as it relates to gender, right? And she's saying this at a time where nobody really fucked with Bell Hooks. I mean, folks fucked with Bell Hooks, but folks didn't fuck with Bell Hooks, right? It's a lot. So you've got Bell Hooks writing against the world about the contours of violence, and she's interviewing Lil' Kim very explicitly about sex. And all of the conversations are housed in this institutional publication. So this is interesting for a multitude of reasons, but whether or not institutions cannibalize these dynamic encounters is a different conversation. But what I'm interested in the most is Lil Kim's willingness to agree to the interview, you know? This is an artist, while completely mainstream, is politically one who inherently is invested in being risky politically. While most artists understand the potential risk of outward politics is losing neutrality and losing out on work, Lil Kim, from the outset of her career, embedded political risk into her work. She surrounded herself with a team that was queer. She worked with producers that weren't out yet. She made herself available to connect a political discourse to her work directly. In terms of political subjectivity within an industry that's dominated by people that devalue this, Lil Kim is like experimental as fuck, you know? Yeah, it's because it's true, right? So back to O'Grady, right? And so this is like a framing of, if you can think about why I'm talking about the theoretical, I'm meaning to imply that all of this is very much attached to and parallel to Black folks making music in the electronic scene, period. Not to say that this is totally true for everyone, not to say that this is everyone's experience, but this is fundamentally a conversation about subjectivity. So again, if anybody has any questions, please just like let me know. So back to O'Grady. So O'Grady's personified critique of the art world enabled her to broadcast her Blackness, her womanhood, and her economic status as intersectional complexities, which she emphasized in exhibition spaces. Her writing continued this work of choreographing new ways of seeing and feeling bodies across space too. The Black female body, the self, personified, framed, adored, monumentalized. In the spirit of a body in its presence or absence. I personally feel like, yeah, this type of experimentation, if you could call it that, bears witness to refusing often really reductive receptions to Black art, Black music, Black experiments, so to speak, social experiments, so to speak. And in this way, I think that experimentation is a necessary intervention for art in general to be more fully received beyond its normal surface level understanding of any genre. And in a way, it demands to be read more completely. This isn't necessarily a call for visibility, because I think that that gets thrown around a little bit too often. Okay, we're gonna like book this Black artist, or we will make sure that we have like X number of folks, or we're representing a more fuller spectrum of folks. Like, that's never saved anybody. It's a little bit of a controversial take, but like, I stand on that. But I do think that is it possible for us to think together that experimentation might be an alternative way of looking at the world, and in turn, creating the spaces that we do create in music making. And so this is where we get theory heavy. This is where I'm a happy camper. Yeah. The history of Blackness is a testament to the fact that objects can and do resist. I say objects because my theoretical position here is that Blackness is never afforded full citizenship into the project of humanness. And this is not really something that I can pick apart today, but it is fundamentally something I believe, unfortunately, right? But there is like a light at the end of the road for this one too, I promise. So Blackness, the extended movement of a specific upheaval, an ongoing eruption that arranges every line, is a strain that pressures the assumption of the equivalence of personhood and subjectivity. While subjectivity is defined by the subject's possession of itself and its objects, it's troubled by a dispossessive force that objects exert, that the subject seems to be possessed, infused, deformed by the object it possesses, a little heady. We're just saying that some folks just don't get to access the world like others, right? I'm interested in what happens when we consider the sonic materiality of the history of music making. Who gets to make what and where? Who has access to those things and why? And why is it easier for some folks to access these things? These are fundamental questions that I'm asking about Blackness, but this is applicable across the board if you think of any hierarchy of folks engaging in art making, period. So to invoke Saidiya Hartman's fundamental work and phrasing, I'm interested in the convergence of Blackness and the irreducible sound of necessary visual performance at the scene of objection. Between looking and being looked at, spectacle and spectatorship, enjoyment and being enjoyed, lies and moves of the economy of what Hartman calls hypervisibility. She allows and demands an investigation of this hypervisibility in its relation to a certain musical obscurity and opens us up to the problematics of everyday ritual and the stagedness of the violently quotidian, the essential drama of Black life, as Zora Neale Hurston might say. She allows us to ask, what have objectification, humanization, and humanization, both of which we can think in relation to a certain notion of subjection, do with the essential historicity or the quintessential modernity of Black performance? This is a double ambivalence that requires analysis of looking and being looked at. Such game requires, above all, some thinking about the opposition of spectacle and routine, violence and pleasure. A critique of the subject animates Hartman's work. It bears the trace, therefore, of a movement exemplified by an aspect of Judith Butler's massive theoretical contribution, wherein lies the call to subjectivity is also understood as the call to subjection and subjugation, and appeals for redress or protection to the state or to the structure of or idea of a citizenship, as well as modes of radical performativity or subversive impersonation, as they're already embedded in the structure they would escape. So in this way, we're thinking about experimentation as a position of queerness, not necessarily making something that's different than what's on your top 40s or whatever's on the top of Bandcamp, you know. So this is the question of whether the performance of subjectivity and the subjectivity that we're interested in here is definitely performed. Always and everywhere, it's a reproduction of what lies before it. It's also a question of whether or not performance in general is ever outside of the economy of reproduction. Are we making anything new? Can anything even be experimental? I personally answer to this is a resounding yes, right? I think I'm more hopeful than I used to be. But we have to be more honest about what music scenes in the larger music industry as a whole require for participation. If we don't answer those questions, I think we're going to be running around in circles, checking off boxes, but not really making the adjustments needed to keep electronic music alive. What are the politics of this unavoidably reproducible and reproductive performance? What is held in the ongoing disruption of its primality? What shape must experimental culture take when it's so ungrounded? What does this disturbance of capture and genesis give back to Black performance? Hartman confronts us with the fact that the conjunction of reproduction and the disappearance is performance's condition of possibility, its ontology and its mode of production. So it's saying, I'm saying rather, that it's not a leap to say that Black artists sometimes don't have the same access to lanes into social capital to do and or make things. I think that's too strong of a claim. But I do say that if we take care of thinking about where we're coming from and the lack of things that we have there, it's a pretty magical thing that we come up with some of the best things you've ever heard. And I stake claim to that pride. I have a deep sense of pride that Jeff Mills is where my family's from, right? I have a deep sense of pride of half the folks on there being friends that have taken care of each other, right? These are cultural practices that keep us making this music. And I feel like this is just my moment to be able to say that out loud, because we hardly ever get to in public spaces. So I continue that. The dialogue of the Black radical tradition is opened by a refusal of recitation, so a reproduction that reproduces what it refuses. So we are still active participants in industry, right? But also, Black artists often have to do this tango of, I'm in the industry and I'm making it, but I have to be quiet about the conditions in which I live. Because if I don't, I might not get that gig. I might not be able to play that festival. I might not be able to land that label. And you might think that these are overstatements, but when I tell you that these are very simply the conditions in which a lot of artists that look like me live, you'll find that that's not even a controversial statement. It's just what it is, right? So what does that mean in terms of, with regards to us more generally though, to us, and also to like the Black people in the room too, you know? What is the calculus of subjectivity or the lack thereof? If we can reframe experimentation as the queering of some sonic landscape, we don't have to be super like theory heavy here. I just mean, if we can remember the folks that are on the outside, right? And that we operate from the outside, then where and why we make music is inherently an experiment. I mean, I don't know if you guys fuck with that, but like, that's where I'm going with this, you know? I think that Black people embrace ghetto tech, we embrace footwork, we embrace ballroom, we embrace Baltimore Club, we embrace Jersey Club, we embrace Ampiano. These are all electronic music genres, right? But I feel like in the context, and like if we localize this discussion to Berlin, they're not considered electronic. If you think about electronic music festivals, those genres are not included. I think that's a little bit, it's not even problematic. It just makes me wonder if people consider those genres electronic, and if they're even allowed to be in these techno spaces that, I mean, that I love, that I respect, that I enjoy, you know. I think we've embraced Miami bass, we embrace trap. These are all electronic music genres, and I think that it's important to highlight these other genres outside of, I haven't said the word yet, but I'll say it now, techno, right? I think that missing those things allows this discursive erasure, right? Within the email chains of doom when you're getting your booking, right? Like everybody's saying we're gonna break the genres a little bit, but that means that they're just gonna play somebody that plays like left-wing, like left techno that I play, like weird shit. And they're like, yeah, we've got like a weirdo on the lineup. The rest of this can be either industrial or like really clean, like classic work. I wonder if experimenting on lineups could do something socially to the way that we work in this industry. But that's just a question. I actually don't even know what the answer to that is, because I am also the person that will say, who's that on the lineup and why are they on the lineup with these people? So contradictions abound, you know what I mean? But I do think that if we don't have these conversations, then we cede what our culture is to European cultures and markets that don't necessarily fundamentally think about what Black people are making, right? So the problem is that that's partially true, right? But there's other stories in terms of how electronic music has existed within Black communities, and Black queer communities specifically. And I think largely for a lot of these musics, their politics have been pushed aside. And it's interesting because I think a lot of this music is made in the context of having a party, having a dance, right? A place to dance. And so in those places, I think, is what this says. The party is a reminder that there's a riot going on. And I would be remiss to not talk about the politics that exist today in the world that we are living in. Not to say that every party needs to have like some moment where somebody stands up and they're like, the world is burning. It's like, no, we know, right? Like we know the world is burning. But how do we remember that some of these genres very specifically come from saying that? How do we respect that? You know, I don't actually think that's a lot of heavy lifting. I think that we just have to do better about booking folks from the places that these things are made, period. So I, if you haven't noticed, I'm a bit of a nerd, deeply a nerd. And I don't know if anybody here studies philosophy. No, anyone? Well, I play around with it. I don't know if I study, you know what I mean? But I could not get over the fact that there's a lot of folks that study this shit, and they always invoke Kant. And I get really frustrated because I'm like, what does Kant have to do with dancing? Like, I don't care, you know? And then I realized, I sort of have to care, he gets it. But, so Kant says that artworks without words are dumb. And I don't know if anybody in here, here's a question that I know that more people will be able to say yes to. Has anybody in here been to Berghain? Right, like, please put your hands up. Yeah, I do not believe the people that didn't put their hands up. I think you are fucking lying, but that's okay. That's okay, you don't have to tell us all your secrets, you know? But, this is a place that I quite, there you go. Really? Not even to see DJ Rush, like, period. Who did you see? Period. Shout out to Aya. Real. You have good taste. Oh, period. We love to hear it. Yes. Right, okay, so like, this is like where we're all meeting. Like, you guys heard me do my nerdy thing, but this is where we're gonna meet, like Berghain, right? There's something to be said about this like enigmatic place, right? Like, you can either love it, you can hate it. You cannot deny that they've done pretty insane work, just shouldering, making sure that the industry understands that this music is important. I've seen some of my favorite Black artists play at Berghain. I'll even admit publicly that I went recently to see DJ Rush, and DJ Rush was playing like Hoover sounds on the main dance floor. I was like, what the fuck is going on at Berghain, you know? But I don't know if any of you guys have experienced this other bit, right? Where you can be at Berghain and somebody Black will be coming from the States playing incredible music, and the minute that a vocal track drops, 10 dudes will stop dancing, right? Just seriously, like, you know, like we're unsing, and then the vocal track. And I'll wait for the whole, like, 8 bars, like 4 bars 8 times. And it's like a beautiful break, and like, you know, homegirl's singing, and she's probably from Detroit, like. And then the wreck, right? And they will wait till it's done for it to restart. I don't know what that shit's about, but I do know it's bullshit, because the music that we love, that unses us all the way to the end of the night, to the point where you leave and you're like, fuck, I just made it out of Berghain, comes from this place that we don't respect enough, right? There is a tension there that needs to be addressed, and there's a certain anti-Blackness there. because it's only Black artists that play that. Not to say that other people don't, right? Like Freddie K, Boots, like she does that. But folks sometimes don't, and we need to understand that there's something to unpack there. If vocal tracks are experimentation at Berghain, we are making mistakes. I just refuse to believe that we're in that place. So it's just something to consider. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how folks in electronic music, specifically techno, obviously there's a bias here, right? Think and talk about space as a future of Black people being in the future. And these are three artists that I really respect and love, two of which I know, one of which I adore. I think you guys can figure that part out. But who all carry the tradition of each other, right? So Jeff Mills has been obsessed about space for time eternal, right? But then you've got Yazis, who's referencing Jeff Mills in her work, Black Metropolis. And you've got another person who extends thinking about Blackness in space, but also connects it to a Brazilian history in Slim Soldedad. So I say all of that to say is that maybe we should be valuing it because this is true, you know? Like, I'd like us just to take a moment. Although my favorite track is The Bells, you know what I mean? Again, contradictions, but his importance is much bigger than that. So I'll end it off with a little nerdy stuff and then a little personal stuff, and then I'm gonna read some shit. So this quote, I think, maybe kind of encapsulates what I've been trying to say this entire time, which is the animative materiality, the aesthetic, the political, the sexual, the racial force of the ensemble of objects that we might call performances, Black history, Blackness, is a real problem, I think, in this industry, but also a chance for real change, for thinking about the philosophy of the human. If we take seriously the work that we're doing as important, then we would be remiss not to think about where it comes from. Not with a shitty, pithy statement that says, I know that techno comes from Detroit. It's more than that. It's not a conversation that we obviously have to have all the time, right? But like, let's get to the genesis of like the rhythm of 4/4 and how, I can't speak for the rest of you, but how I put my food on the table. It's this. It has a history. It has a genesis. It was experimentation at one point. To me, it's still an experiment. An experiment to see whether or not people will take us seriously, but an experiment to breaking whatever paths of privilege that we all contain and bringing more people into the fold of making music that changes the world. And I truly believe, I always end with this, or I add this to my essays, because I really do mean it, right? Tending to injuries about injuries about a subjectivity that's never allowed us to fully inhabit our own culture is painful, but we make beautiful shit every day. So that's like the end of my presentation portion. Yeah. I'm gonna play a little bit of music and I'm gonna read a little bit of poetry. But when we have like time, if anybody has questions, we'll have a little bit of time at the end. Yeah, is that cool? Yeah. Okay, you guys are ready. Give me 1 second. Is this time correct? I think I have 15 minutes or no idea. Well, we're gonna wing it. Hello, hello. Perfect. Hello. Pues mija, remember the sea as we know it, knew it then. You cling to something called the state, and babe, we've escaped drowning the whole ocean. While we didn't choose to cross it, some chose to refuse. And now, what we know, and what it is, and what it isn't, I choose to understand that there's so many things in the world that just don't make sense. The girlies tell me that the cosmopolitan thing to do now is forget about it. Don't be stressed. Let it go. But the thing is, I don't want to engage in the euphemistic opacity of what we want to ignore. I don't have the time for that, and neither do you. Which are the rules of relentless exploration of the way we are? You see, I have an obsession. I am literally obsessed with sound. Due in part to the nature of sound, I'm moved by the relationship between where my body is extracted from and outsourced in the name of the counterculture. I wonder, what does it mean for me to move if I've never been able to fully inhabit the human? You see, our culture's been outsourced in the name of counterculture, and I feel like there's just never been a high enough price paid. I've been curious about the way we relate and the way that we move, because the emotional weight of the now is crushing my larynx. By trade and by somebody who plays with sound by passion, I've been allowed to circumvent the sometimes flat and often limiting nature of my disabilities and my restricted vocabulary. What are we doing when we try to communicate in the languages of the captors? I am trying to express myself. I am trying to express myself. I am trying to express myself. You see, I wrote this whole presentation for you, and I still don't think I told you what I was trying to say. Can you hear me? See, sometimes the words are not there, but I feel the shiver and the pound of the underground, and I'm not sure if that's the reverb of the bass, or if my anxiety is gripping my ribcage, or if I can't find where to place the stores of violence, but that's fine. See, because we may be saying the same words, but we are not saying the same thing, and I truly do have injuries that feel familiar. Language hovers at the edge of sense so that sound rises to the fore, and the reading of the poem approaches musical performance. So yes, I think about the connectedness of where sound travels. In ways I like to explain the architecture of social space, of flesh, of the sea, of carcerality, of the falsehoods of the post-human as equalizer, of the lies of homogeneity and community and liberal discourse, of technological advancement. What the fuck is AI anyway? I ruminate on the language I don't have and the necessary stress of making things that might not make sense, but I do it anyway. The politics of borders aren't limited to sound, but they relate to sound traveling through it. Oral traditions break boundaries of the state. What do we do to continue those things? So I study all of it. Is there something more transversal than that? Probably. But I'm trans like the practice of study that doesn't hold much weight in the academy. Just a queer bitch that really likes to rave. Trans like autistic, like me, but nobody will trust that, and that's okay. It also offers obscurity in the open, to work at the edge of the border, inside the border, and then back at the edge, because of those things and the edge at the same time. To work is to work at the very heart of those things. Imagine some image of a whirlwind or a black hole. It's not the outside edge of the thing that isn't critical. It's just that there's this inside edge too. And I have not found the place that holds me and lets me hide, because blackness is surveilled and sold even when it's not black. And I've not found the place that holds me and lets me hide, again, because blackness is surveilled and sold even when it's not black. The sensation sits in my chest and acts like the cancer to the patients of my thoughts. And the pain of that cancer is much more heavy than the cancer that I actually dealt with. And I mean that. It's more cumbersome than what had grown inside of me and sought to take me out. But I still truly believe that music's more important than that. I think that's all I have to say for today, but I just want to add one last thing. If you couldn't take or carry any of the crazy shit that I said today, just remember that music is protest music if you want it to be. That's it. Thank you.